They wanted us gone. The Council thought the galaxy would be safer without humanity. Too volatile, too unpredictable, too dangerous. And so we left, without protest, without a word. But silence has a way of echoing across the stars. Now every empire feels the absence they created, and every shadow whispers our name. The silent departure commander, Sarah Mitchell, stood at the observation deck of Central Hub Station, watching the stars through reinforced glass that stretched 3 stories high. She had watched these same stars for 15 years, ever since she first arrived as a young engineer fresh from Earth. The station hummed around her, a constant vibration she had learned to sleep through, to work through, to live through. 63 species called the Galactic Confederation home, and this station was its beating heart. Her tablet buzzed. The message was short, encrypted, and expected. Sarah had known it would come eventually. They all had. She read the single line twice before deleting it. Protocol Nightingale is now active. Her hands were steady as she set the tablet down. No trembling, no tears. She had made peace with this decision months ago, perhaps years ago if she was honest with herself. The Central Hub Station processed everything that kept the Confederation running. Power distribution for 70 colony worlds, atmospheric regulation for stations that housed billions, communication networks that translated between species whose vocal ranges spanned frequencies humans could not even hear. Someone had to make sure it all worked perfectly. Every single day, every single hour, for 5 centuries that someone had been human. Sarah walked through the central operations room. Screens covered every wall, displaying data streams in colors and symbols from dozens of different species. At the main console, technician David Park was reviewing power consumption reports for the Outer Rim territories. He glanced up when Sarah approached, and something in her expression made him nod slowly. He had received the message too. Around them, aliens of various species worked at their stations. The Vortan supervisor, whose name Sarah could pronounce but never spell, was coordinating supply shipments. 2 Krell engineers debated the efficiency of a new routing algorithm, their bioluminescent skin flashing in patterns that indicated friendly disagreement. A methylene doctor consulted with the medical bay about a patient requiring specialized care. None of them noticed anything unusual. Why would they? Humans were always working, always present, always reliable. In the medical center 6 levels down, Dr. James Rodriguez was finishing his shift. He had been the chief medical coordinator for 11 years, managing a team of doctors from 20 different species. The job was not about medicine, not really. It was about understanding. The Vortan physician needed to know that Krell patients required complete darkness during recovery. The methylene surgeon needed to understand that human patients found tentacles frightening, even gentle medical ones. James knew which species considered eye contact during diagnosis rude, which ones needed family present for treatment decisions, and which ones required specific prayers before surgery. He had written it all down. Every cultural consideration, every medical interaction nuance, every lesson learned from a decade of preventing misunderstandings that could kill patients. The document was 300 pages long. He uploaded it to the medical database with full access permissions, then began packing his personal belongings. A photo of his daughter, a coffee mug from Earth, a thank you note from a Krell family whose child he had saved. Everything fit into one bag. On the residential levels, teacher Maria Santos was saying goodbye to her students. She taught communication theory, helping young aliens understand how different species expressed the same emotions in completely different ways. Her classroom was always full. Students loved her patient explanations and her ability to demonstrate concepts with simple examples. Today, she told them class was canceled for the rest of the week. When they asked why, she smiled and said she was taking a vacation. It was not technically a lie. Earth was quite nice this time of year. In the engineering bays that powered the station, Li Wei was conducting his final systems check. He had designed most of the backup systems himself, creating redundancies the original architects had never considered. The station could handle 3 simultaneous power failures now instead of 1. He had submitted detailed maintenance schedules, troubleshooting guides, and emergency protocols. Everything was documented in clear, simple language that anyone could follow. Whether anyone would actually read it was not his problem anymore. The Confederation Council had met that morning, as they did every morning, in their grand chamber on the diplomatic levels. 47 representatives from the major species discussed trade agreements, border disputes, and expansion proposals. Not a single human sat among them. Humans were observers, had been observers for 500 years. They could attend meetings, could offer suggestions, could provide data and analysis. But they could not vote on decisions that affected trillions of lives, including their own. 500 years ago, humanity had joined the Confederation with hope and enthusiasm. Earth had been the 63rd species to join, bringing with them their strange endurance and their peculiar talent for understanding others. The Council had welcomed them, assigned them support roles, and promised that one day, perhaps in 1,000 years or so, humans might be ready for full membership. Humans had smiled and nodded and gotten to work. They had worked brilliantly. Wherever there was a problem nobody else wanted to solve, humans solved it. Wherever there was a gap between species that could not understand each other, humans bridged it. Wherever there was a system that needed constant attention and adjustment, humans provided it. They asked for nothing except occasional recognition, fair treatment, and eventually, a voice in decisions that affected them. The Council had listened politely to every request and denied them all. Humans were young, they said. Enthusiastic but inexperienced. Perhaps in another few centuries they would understand how the Confederation really worked. Until then, humans should continue their excellent support work and be patient. Sarah watched the cargo bay through security cameras. Humans were gathering there, dozens of them, then hundreds. They came from every section of the station, carrying single bags or small containers. Engineers and doctors, teachers and technicians, diplomats and maintenance workers. They moved quietly, speaking in low voices, helping each other with luggage. No arguments, no protests, no dramatic announcements. They simply showed up at the designated time, ready to leave. The transport ships were waiting. Sleek human vessels that had been positioned at various docking ports throughout the day. To anyone watching, it looked like a normal rotation of personnel. Ships came and went constantly at Central Hub Station. Nobody paid special attention to a few human transports loading passengers. Li Wei was the last to leave the engineering bay. He placed a data chip on the main console, clearly labeled with instructions. The chip contained everything, every system specification, every modification he had made, every trick he had learned to keep the aging infrastructure running smoothly. He had spent 2 months preparing it. Then he walked out without looking back. In the medical center, Dr. Rodriguez briefed his replacement, a skilled Vortan physician who had trained on 7 worlds. He explained the current patient load, pointed out the cultural sensitivity documents, and wished him luck. The Vortan doctor thanked him and asked when James would return from his vacation. James just smiled and said he would be gone for a while. Maria Santos left lesson plans for her substitute teacher. Commander Sarah Mitchell transferred all command codes to the station administrator. David Park uploaded his final power consumption reports. One by one, humans completed their tasks, documented their knowledge, and walked away from jobs they had held for years or even decades. The first transport ship departed at 1400 hours station time, then another at 1430, then 3 more at 1500. By 1600 hours, 12 ships had left, carrying nearly 2,000 humans. The alien workers finally began to notice. Humans were leaving, not just a few, but all of them. Every single human on the station was boarding transport ships. Questions started flying through the communication networks. Where were they going? Why now? Was there an emergency on Earth? The few humans still waiting for their transport smiled politely and said they were just going home. Nothing to worry about. Everything was documented. The systems would be fine. By 1800 hours, the last transport ship sealed its doors. Sarah Mitchell stood at a viewport, looking back at Central Hub Station one final time. The lights were still on. The systems were still running. Everything appeared normal. She knew exactly how long that would last. Perhaps a week before the first serious problems appeared. Perhaps a month before the catastrophic failures began. Perhaps 3 months before the Council realized what humans had actually been doing all along. The transport jumped to faster than light speed. Sarah closed her eyes. 60 light years to Earth. 2 weeks of travel. Then home, really home for the first time in 15 years. Behind her, Central Hub Station continued its rotation, unaware that everything had just changed. The humans had left without saying a word, and soon their silence would speak louder than 5 centuries of patient service ever had. The unraveling. The first sign of trouble appeared on day 5. A minor fluctuation in the power grid serving the eastern quadrant of Central Hub Station. The Vortan engineer on duty noticed the reading, checked the manual that Li Wei had left behind, and adjusted the compensator exactly as instructed. The fluctuation stopped. Problem solved. He felt proud of himself for handling it so efficiently. The fluctuation returned 3 hours later in a different sector, then another in the western quadrant, then 2 more simultaneously in the industrial zones. Each time, the engineers followed the manual, made the adjustments, and watched the problems temporarily disappear. What they did not understand was the pattern. Li Wei would have recognized it immediately. The fluctuations were not isolated incidents but symptoms of a deeper systemic issue that required a complete recalibration of the power distribution network. But Li Wei was 60 light-years away, and the manual could only explain procedures, not teach intuition earned through 15 years of experience. By day 8, 6 sectors were operating on backup power. The main systems had not failed completely, but they had become unreliable. Lights would dim without warning, then brighten again. Temperature controls would spike or drop by several degrees. Computer systems would slow to a crawl, then resume normal speed. Nothing catastrophic, just thousands of small disruptions that made life frustrating and work difficult. On Colony World Designation Theta 7, disaster struck on day 12. The colony housed 40,000 residents from 8 different species. Its atmosphere processors were sophisticated machines that maintained breathable air for everyone, compensating for the planet's naturally toxic environment. Human technician Rachel Moore had maintained those processors for 9 years. She had made tiny adjustments every single day, responding to weather patterns, seasonal changes, and the subtle variations in atmospheric pressure that the automated systems could not detect. The processors had backup systems, redundancies built upon redundancies. They were designed to run automatically, and they did run automatically, following their programming exactly. But programming could not account for everything. When an unexpected dust storm altered the atmospheric composition in ways the sensors had never encountered before, the automated systems made logical decisions based on incomplete data. Those decisions were technically correct but practically dangerous. The oxygen levels began dropping. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. The automated alerts triggered, but they were coded in technical language that the local administrators misinterpreted. They thought they had hours to respond. They had minutes. By the time they understood the severity, 3,000 colonists were experiencing respiratory distress. 27 died before emergency teams from neighboring worlds arrived. The incident report landed on the Confederation Council's table like a bomb. Council member Thane, a dignified Krell whose family had served in government for 6 generations, read it with growing horror. He had been on the council for 40 years and had never seen anything like this. Colony worlds did not have atmospheric failures. The systems were too advanced, too reliable. Except they were only reliable when humans maintained them. Emergency sessions filled the council chamber for 3 consecutive days. Representatives shouted at each other in 40 different languages, their translation devices struggling to keep up with the overlapping accusations and defenses. Some blamed the human technicians for sabotage, insisting they must have damaged systems before leaving. Others argued that humans had been incompetent all along, hiding their inadequacy behind false expertise. A few younger council members suggested the obvious truth that no one wanted to hear. Humans had been essential, and now they were gone. The medical facilities reported their own crisis on day 15. Dr. Chen, a highly qualified methylene physician, was treating a Vortan patient with a respiratory infection. The condition was common and easily treatable. He prescribed the standard medication and sent the patient home. The patient died 6 hours later. The medication was correct for Vortan biology, but this particular Vortan belonged to a religious sect that considered any medicine derived from animal sources to be spiritually contaminating. Dr. Rodriguez would have known this. He had maintained detailed files on every religious and cultural medical consideration for 20 different species. Dr. Chen had access to those files, but there were 300 pages of information, and he had 40 patients to see that day. He had not had time to read everything. The death was ruled accidental, but 3 more similar incidents occurred within the following week. A Krell patient refused surgery because the methylene surgeon did not understand the required family consultation protocols. A human patient, yes, there were still human civilians in Confederation space, went into shock because the Vortan doctor administered treatment while maintaining direct eye contact, not knowing that humans found sustained eye contact from large predatory species deeply triggering in medical contexts. Each incident was small, each was understandable, each was completely preventable with knowledge that humans had accumulated over centuries. The trade routes began collapsing on day 20. Ships still traveled between worlds, cargo still moved, but the intricate timing that kept everything flowing smoothly disappeared. Human logistics coordinators had spent generations optimizing these routes. They knew which station managers could be convinced to expedite shipments during emergencies. They understood which species holidays would slow customs processing. They had relationships with dock workers, captains, and administrators across hundreds of worlds. Without humans, everyone followed the official procedures exactly. And the official procedures were inefficient, outdated, and designed for a confederation one-third its current size. Ships waited days for clearances that humans would have processed in hours. Cargo sat in warehouses because the automated scheduling systems could not account for the personal relationships that made the real system work. Prices began rising as delays compounded. Colonies that depended on regular food shipments faced shortages. Medical supplies arrived weeks late. The economy, which had grown steadily for 5 centuries, contracted by 8% in a single month. In the diplomatic corps, translator Annika Williams had been humanity's representative for cultural communication. She had not negotiated treaties or made policy decisions. Her job had been simpler and more important. She made sure everyone understood what everyone else actually meant. Languages could be translated word for word, but meaning required context. When a Krell diplomat said something was acceptable under review, it meant enthusiastic agreement. When a methylene said the same phrase, it meant polite rejection. Annika knew these subtleties for 63 species. Without her, diplomatic communications became minefields. A trade negotiation between the Krell and the Vortan nearly collapsed into military threats because both sides misunderstood the other's negotiating posture. What the Krell intended as aggressive bargaining, the Vortan interpreted as preparation for war. What the Vortan meant as firm boundaries, the Krell heard as insults to their honor. Only the intervention of elder diplomats who remembered pre-human communication methods prevented disaster. The negotiation that should have taken 3 days stretched into 6 weeks and produced a treaty. Both sides resented. Council member Thane called for a comprehensive assessment. He appointed committees to investigate every sector where humans had worked. The reports came back over the following weeks, and each one told the same story. Humans had not been doing support work. They had been doing essential work that everyone else had taken for granted. They had been the tissue connecting different parts of the Confederation body. Without them, the body still lived, but it moved slowly, clumsily, painfully. The Power Station Committee reported that human engineers had been compensating for design flaws in infrastructure for decades. The Medical Committee discovered that human doctors had prevented hundreds of cultural misunderstanding deaths every year. The Logistics Committee found that human coordinators had been personally managing thousands of exceptions to official procedures, exceptions that kept the trade economy flowing. The Diplomatic Committee admitted that human translators had been preventing conflicts that could have destabilized entire regions. On day 43, Junior Council Aide Mika, a young Vortan who had only been in her position for 2 years, made a suggestion during a council session. Perhaps they should contact the humans. Perhaps they should explain that there had been a misunderstanding. Perhaps they should ask them to come back. The chamber fell silent. 47 representatives looked at each other, and in that silence they all acknowledged the truth they had been avoiding. They had made a mistake. A catastrophic mistake. For 500 years they had dismissed human contributions as simple support work. They had denied humans voting rights because humans were too young to understand complex governance. They had refused humans partnership because humans needed more time to prove themselves worthy. And all the while, humans had been holding the entire Confederation together with their labor, their knowledge, and their patience. Councilmember Thane cleared his throat, a sound like rocks grinding that indicated deep thought in Krell communication. He spoke carefully, weighing each word. Perhaps reaching out to humanity would be wise. Perhaps negotiations could be opened. Perhaps terms could be discussed that would be mutually beneficial. He did not say the words that everyone was thinking. They needed humans desperately, and they had no idea if humans would ever agree to return. The question hung in the air of the council chamber like smoke. Around them, the Confederation continued its awkward stumble forward, learning slowly and painfully what humans had known all along. Some jobs look simple from the outside. Some work appears automatic because skilled people make it look easy. And some contributions only become visible in their absence, when the silence left behind speaks louder than centuries of dedicated service ever could. The price of understanding. 2 years had passed since the last human transport ship departed from Confederation space. The crisis had not destroyed the Galactic Alliance, but it had fundamentally changed it. Central hub stations still operated, colony worlds still maintained their atmospheres, trade ships still traveled between stars. But everything cost more, took longer, and worked less reliably. The Confederation had learned to function without humans, though it functioned like a person who had lost a limb and was still learning to walk again. Council member Thane stood in the grand chamber, looking at the empty observation gallery where human representatives had once sat. They had never been allowed to vote, but they had attended every session for 5 centuries, offering advice when asked, providing data when needed, watching silently when ignored. The gallery had been empty for 2 years now, and its emptiness felt like an accusation. The first delegation to Earth had departed 6 months after humans left. Thane had led it personally, bringing with him offers of full council membership, expanded territorial rights, and formal apologies. The journey took 3 weeks, and during those weeks, he rehearsed his speech 100 times. He would explain that there had been misunderstandings. He would acknowledge that perhaps humans had been ready for full participation sooner than the council had recognized. He would offer partnership, real partnership, with voting rights and equal status. It was everything humans had asked for over the centuries. Ambassador Marcus Chen had received them in a simple conference room on Earth. No grand chamber, no elaborate ceremony, just a room with windows overlooking an ocean. Marcus was younger than Thane had expected, perhaps 50 years old in human terms, with gray beginning to show in his dark hair. He listened to Thane's entire speech without interrupting, his expression neutral and unreadable. When Thane finished, Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he thanked Thane for traveling so far. He acknowledged the council's offers with professional courtesy, and he declined them all. Humanity would maintain diplomatic relations with the Confederation. They would continue trading on fair terms. They would share technology and knowledge when mutually beneficial, but they would not return to Confederation space to work as they had before. They would not resume the roles they had held for 500 years. They would participate as equals, from a distance, on their own terms, or they would not participate at all. Thane had expected negotiation. He had prepared counteroffers, compromise positions, incentive packages. But Marcus did not negotiate. He simply explained in calm and measured words why humanity's answer was no. The issue was not about voting rights or territory or formal status. The issue was about respect, and respect could not be purchased or negotiated after centuries of dismissal. The Council had spent 500 years treating human contributions as simple support work performed by an eager but naive species. They had laughed at human requests for recognition. They had denied human proposals for partnership. They had taken human labor for granted, while refusing to acknowledge its value. Marcus had shown Thane a document during that meeting. It was a compilation of every proposal humans had submitted to the Council over 5 centuries. Proposals for improved safety protocols, proposals for cultural sensitivity training, proposals for better maintenance schedules, proposals for fair representation. The document was 14,000 pages long. Every single proposal had been marked as reviewed and declined, or deferred for future consideration. 500 years of human effort, systematically dismissed. When Thane returned to the Confederation, he presented his report to the full council. Some members grew angry, insisting that humans were being unreasonable and vindictive. Others grew defensive, arguing that the council had acted appropriately according to standard procedures. A few grew quiet, finally understanding what they had lost. The debate continued for months, but the conclusion remained the same. Humans would not return, and the Confederation would have to adapt. The adaptation was expensive and difficult. The Confederation hired consultants from various species to replace human expertise. They paid premium rates for specialists who could maintain power systems, manage logistics, coordinate medical cultural protocols, and facilitate diplomatic communications. But specialists worked in isolated areas of expertise. They did not have the holistic understanding that humans had developed over centuries of managing interconnected systems. A Krell engineer could maintain power distribution efficiently, but he did not understand how power fluctuations affected medical equipment or communication arrays. A methylene doctor could treat patients competently, but she did not recognize how religious holidays affected medical scheduling or how cultural taboos influenced treatment acceptance. The specialists were skilled and dedicated, but they worked in silos, and the Confederation's problems existed in the spaces between those silos where humans had once worked. On Earth, humanity was thriving in ways that surprised even themselves. For 5 centuries, humans had been focused outward, contributing to the Confederation, building relationships with alien species, working to prove their worth to others. Now they turned their attention inward, developing their own civilization according to their own values. They built new stations around Earth and Mars. They established colonies in their own star system. They created universities that taught the lessons they had learned about cross-cultural communication, not to serve others but to understand themselves. Dr. Rodriguez opened a medical school that became famous across human space. He taught not just medicine, but the art of seeing patients as whole beings with cultures, beliefs, and fears. His students learned to listen before treating, to understand before prescribing, to recognize that healing required more than correct diagnoses. Graduates from his school became the most sought-after doctors in human civilization, and a few went to work in Confederation space as independent contractors, charging rates that reflected the true value of their expertise. Commander Sarah Mitchell founded an engineering firm that designed infrastructure systems for human colonies. She brought the lessons she had learned at Central Hub Station, but she applied them differently. Her designs included proper maintenance schedules from the beginning. They incorporated training programs for operators. They planned for the reality that systems needed constant attention from skilled people who understood them holistically. Her firm became profitable within 6 months and expanded to 12 worlds within 2 years. Maria Santos wrote a book about her experiences teaching in the Confederation. It became required reading in every human diplomatic academy. The book was not bitter or angry. It simply explained what she had learned about cross-cultural understanding and about the importance of recognizing when others do not value your contributions. The final chapter was titled, "The Dignity of Walking Away," and it argued that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and others is to stop accepting unacceptable treatment. The Confederation continued sending delegations to Earth. Some offered increased compensation. Some proposed limited partnerships for specific projects. Some suggested cultural exchange programs. Humanity accepted a few offers, always on short-term contracts with clear boundaries and fair payment. Human consultants would work in Confederation space for 6 months or a year, solving specific problems, then return home. They were professional and effective, but they no longer cared about the work in the same way. They did their jobs competently and collected their payments. The passion that had driven 5 centuries of human contribution was gone. Council member Thane grew old during those 2 years. His scales, which had been bright blue when humans departed, faded to pale gray. He spent more time in the observation gallery, looking at the empty seats where human representatives had once sat. Other council members avoided the gallery. It made them uncomfortable, this visible reminder of their failure. But Thane went there often, thinking about the choices that had led them here. He remembered a meeting 20 years ago before the human departure. A young human engineer had proposed upgrading the power distribution network at Central Hub Station. The proposal was detailed and well-researched. It would have cost money and required shutting down sectors temporarily for installation. The council had reviewed it, noted the expense and inconvenience, and declined it. The young engineer had been Li Wei, and the upgrade he proposed would have prevented the cascading failures that nearly destroyed the station after humans left. Thane had voted to decline that proposal. He could not remember why it had seemed reasonable at the time. In the council chamber, they erected a memorial. It was a beautiful structure made of crystal that caught light and split it into rainbows. 47 languages were inscribed on its surface with the same message: in memory of contributions taken for granted, voices left unheard, and lessons learned too late. May we never again fail to recognize the value of those who serve beside us. The memorial was unveiled in a ceremony, attended by representatives from all member species. Several speeches were made about the importance of appreciation and recognition. Marcus Chen attended the ceremony as Earth's ambassador. He stood silently during the speeches, his expression neutral. When asked to speak, he declined politely. There was nothing he needed to say. The memorial was not for humanity. It was for the Confederation, a reminder to themselves about the price of dismissing others. Humans had already learned their lesson. They had learned that their worth was not determined by others' recognition. They had learned that sometimes walking away was the only way to maintain dignity. They had learned that respect offered under duress was not really respect at all. After the ceremony, Thane approached Marcus privately. The old Krell looked tired, his movements slower than they had been 2 years before. He asked Marcus a question he had been afraid to voice publicly. Would humanity ever forgive the Confederation? Would there ever be a time when humans would return, not as consultants or contractors, but as true partners who cared about the Alliance's success? Marcus considered the question carefully. He looked at Thane with clear eyes and gave an honest answer. Perhaps, he said. Perhaps in a century or two, when new generations led both humanity and the Confederation, when the memory of dismissal had faded enough that genuine partnership could be built without the weight of past resentments. When the Confederation had proven through decades of changed behavior that they truly understood the lessons they claimed to have learned. But not now, not yet. The wounds were too fresh, and trust once broken could not be quickly repaired. Thane nodded slowly. He thanked Marcus for his honesty and walked away, back to the council chamber where 47 species continued their work of governance. The Confederation would survive. It would adapt and learn and eventually thrive again in its new form. But it would always carry the scar of humanity's silent departure, a permanent reminder that some contributions only become visible when they disappear. On Earth, Marcus stood on a balcony overlooking the ocean. The water stretched to the horizon, constant and eternal. Humanity had left the stars and returned home, not in defeat but in dignity. They had discovered something valuable in those 5 centuries of service. Their worth had never depended on the Confederation's acknowledgement. They had always been essential, always been valuable, always been worthy of respect. The only thing that changed was their willingness to accept anything less. The galaxy continued spinning. Ships traveled between stars. Species traded and negotiated and lived their lives. The Confederation functioned with acceptable efficiency, having learned to work without humans through costly adaptation. And 60 light-years away, humanity built their own future, free from the burden of proving themselves to those who had never truly seen them. Sometimes the most powerful statement is silence. Sometimes the greatest lesson is taught through absence. And sometimes walking away is not giving up but finally understanding your own worth.